Hi. Look, it is my goal today to eventually record, I guess in one take, a half-decent video explaining what I've been trying to work on. But to even describe what I'm trying to work on is something that I've had trouble doing, because it's kind of ridiculously complicated. Essentially what I'm working on is replacing this screen. This is our map screen. This is our map loading in, as you can see. It's an infinite map, so these things don't exist until you look at them, and the amount of them that do exist is sort of determined by where you're looking. So as you can see, I can sort of just zoom in on whatever the hell I want. This map is simple. It's prone to some errors, as you can see here, in how it generates. And it's all done on the CPU. I call it a first draft. It's got problems. One of the problems is that it needs to do the impossible, and it doesn't. Maybe you would consider it reasonable to not be able to do the impossible. Here you see something that's kind of weird as far as Infinite Worlds goes. I've got ships that move around in an infinite world, and they move through sectors that the player hasn't been to yet. And if you think about this, what that means is that the artificial intelligence of the game is commanding an army, like a strategy game would command an army in a strategy game, and it's moving characters across the map when the map has never existed, and may never exist ever, on account of the player determines what parts of the map exists by going to that map. If you think about a game like StarCraft, at the beginning of the game, you load the map, and for the entire game, the AI always has access to the whole map. Maybe they can't see it because there's like fog of war, but something like pathfinding is always capable of knowing whether or not they need to go around a mountain based on where you click. Resource nodes are always there and can be pulled by the computer to figure out whether or not it's valid to tell someone to build a base in a certain location, so on and so forth. That information is there from the beginning of the strategy session. It's loaded off the hard disk, put into memory, and the game starts. So how do you get a bunch of ships to move around in an infinite world when chunks of the world don't even exist until the player looks at it? And of course, the chunks can't exist until the player looks at it because there's an infinite number of them. And here you see I'm regenerating chunks that already regenerated, and it's going slow. Could go a lot faster. It's ugly. What are these points of light that are different colors? Anyways, so we're making a new one, rebuilding it from scratch. And the first thing that had to go is how I actually create these sectors. Actually, it's a pretty complicated process already. And I say already, I mean in this iteration. See, here you've got some colors that you don't see in the rest of the universe. Some interesting stuff going on here that isn't maybe going on here, that certainly isn't going on here. So we do a couple things. The first thing is that the entire process of generation for the universe is something that happens on a grid-by-grid basis. So if you ask me, how is the universe generated? I say, the universe is just generating all the grids. And so then you say, how is a grid generated? And I say, well, there's a worker thread that goes in the background and does all this stuff. And the stuff is that you sample noise, and you figure out what type of thing the noise would create, be it a planet, or asteroids, or a star. And then once you figure out it's supposed to be a planet, you check nearby to see if there's a star, and if there is a star, you can place the planet, and then you sample the noise again to figure out what type of planet. And once you've done all that, you go out and you check the data folder, and you see, oh look, it was actually, there's actually a data file that says I'm supposed to replace this sector with this brown stuff. And you throw out all your work and you put in this brown stuff that was added by some mod maker who decided that this sector needed to have brown stuff in it. And then once you have brown stuff, you distill that all down to a key, which is a color. And you put brown at that location. That's the first step. The second step in this map system is to draw an icon at that location and color it based on the color. And then if the player actually goes into that location, the color brown is used as a key in a dictionary to look up the contents of that sector. But the contents of that sector don't actually exist. They're generated when you go there. So we have a database of colors which map to generators. So the color brown maps to a bunch of code which places this backdrop and these asteroids and, these colors, these light patterns, all of the things that you see when you're here is generated by code which determines the contents of a sector. And all of that stuff is mapped to the color brown, which was placed by the algorithm because in this case, I created mod data that overwrote this sector, but elsewhere in the universe you might have asteroid belts which are generated just by the procedural algorithm. So here you've got an infinite universe that's built using noise sampling so that it's deterministic. Every time you look at it, it generates the same stuff. Like right now, all of this stuff that's on screen, if I go over here, that stuff doesn't exist anymore. Like it's gone from memory. And if I go and I look again, now it's been regenerated. And it was never stored anywhere. Every time I look at it, it takes this sector, this grid right here, and it says what should be here. And since it's based on math, it always comes up the same every time I do it. This is a ice planet in a gray asteroid belt every time I look at it. And we're using really, really sort of low quality noise. I don't mean... I mean that the noise algorithm that we're sampling to get this universe is boring. It's simplex noise. It's got no sort of it's got no interesting artifacts. It's got nothing to it. Also, it's done on the CPU, which means it's slow, and I have to do the whole algorithm for each individual grid. And on top of all that, because things completely disappear when you aren't looking at them, the AI doesn't really know what's going to be in this sector until I go over there. So you can see right now there's no little arrows here, and that's because when I enter this sector, those ships, these sort of virtual ships that are flying around in a virtual sector, when I go to the real sector, it actually generates actual ships, and it generates the actual sector, and so they move to a separate area of memory that doesn't have little arrows drawn for it. That's why you don't see them anymore. And they're simulated differently because you can actually see them. You can see, look, they're shooting at each other now. They're doing stuff. Or no, I think those are escorts. Yeah, they're escorting their buddy. Point is, those guys were escorting their friend before they became real ships. Even in this view, they were escorting them each other. They were going about their lives, but the limitation of this map is that they didn't know anything about what was in this system. And that means that if I wanted to place a station in this system for them to dock with and interact with, there's no way for them to know that that station is there because that station literally doesn't exist until I go to that station. And that's a problem because what we wanted to make for the next patch is a dynamic economy. Yep, I said it. I know. All these space games, they always end up with space trader aspects where you're going back and trading stuff, buying low, selling high. I know it's the same stuff over and over again. I think that we as game developers put that feature in because A, it's something people want, B, it's an easy way to make the universe feel dynamic and alive, and C, it's easy to understand, and so it's easy to work with. So Wayward Terran Frontier is doing sort of a new take on it because we're trying to have a dynamic economy in an infinite universe. And that means that we have to figure out how to solve the problem of the map, which is generated when you look at it, having aspects that are pre-cached or pre-generated enough that the AI can know that there's going to be a trade hub here and a farm there and a factory there and a shipyard there, and so the AI can be flying around going to these places. And you can bump into the AI, and they've got a real destination at a real place before you've even been to that place and generated that destination, before any of that stuff really physically exists. And the reason it's important for it to not exist until you look at it is because, computers have a finite amount of memory. I can say that a universe is infinite, but a computer's memory is not infinite. The amount of stuff that can happen simultaneously is never going to be infinite. So my job in designing an infinite universe is to design an infinite universe in a way that appears infinite because you can see a finite amount of it at any given time without any sort of lagginess even here I say this iteration of the universe is not great because, and here's a great example, all I have to do is zoom out and A, universe very slowly loads in, and B, when I get enough of these things, it's going to go down in frame rate really bad, and C, it's not that pretty. So, universe isn't ever really infinite because only a very small amount of it is ever in memory at any given time. The whole point is designing a system that loads that stuff in and out of memory as you look at it in a way that allows the AI to keep working on it when you aren't looking at it, and also in a way that it's smooth and seamless and doesn't interrupt the play experience. So, and man, there were other problems with this map. I mean, it was coded sloppily. I think probably a lot of the bugs that exist in the game with regards to ships moving around is a result of how the universe is just represented in memory. So I'm going to switch over now, and I want to show you the new map, and then the second part of my rant is going to be about how the map works, I guess, in the next patch. And here it is. Exact same system, exact same sector, new generation technique, and a new rendering technique. Everything looks completely different, but I assure you this is the exact same sector we were in before, and the exact same, well, part of that sector. This is in 3D now, and you'll notice the icons don't really look like icons anymore. But I assure you, they are technically icon-like. In fact, the icons now exist outside of the game code. These icons, so the old icons, the ones that look like garbage, were hard-coded into the game engine. These icons that don't even look like icons, they just look like epic 3D nebula-looking stuff. These are part of the extension system and can be very easily added in by anyone who's making sort of their own sort of sector type to the game. Can provide an icon and a mask. If you provide a tileable texture and a mask, then what our algorithm does is it places in 3D space these fancy things, and we'll make something that looks like this using your art. Maybe someday I'll make a tutorial video for that. But point is, exact same system. Tile by tile, every single tile in this system, aside from this green stuff we added, should be the exact same home sector as the one you're used to. In fact, it's using the same data to generate it, but the technique overall to generate it is a bit different. If I zoom out now, what you'll see is that the universe is also very different. I'm getting a bit of a glitching here because Fraps doesn't like the fact, or I should say the game doesn't like Fraps, and the reason it doesn't is because the generation of this world is actually done partially on the GPU now. So I mentioned noise sampling and how we used noise sampling to generate the individual grids the individual sectors of the game map before. We still use noise sampling, but it's no longer sampling that's done tile by tile on the CPU. Instead, this is noise sampling that's done region by region, one big region at a time on the GPU. So we are generating a big old chunk, I don't know, about that big, of this map on the GPU using fractal noise, a whole bunch of different fancy noise algorithms. And that generates cool artifacts and sectors like this, so you can get this sort of asteroid field looking thing over here, and some cool ice fields that are all sorts of different shapes. After generating the noise on the GPU, we get this texture that has sort of a bunch of noise channels for every single, you think of the GPU is generating pixels, so here we have grids. You get 1 pixel per grid. The values of the various color channels in the pixels, we use math on it to generate this. But this game world has a number of new properties, and one of the first properties that you'll notice of this game world is that on generating a new game, you no longer are put instantly into the game, but you have to go through a loading screen. The reason you have to go through a loading screen is because sectors are no longer 100% gone when you aren't looking at them. Sectors that you enter, or sectors that the AI enters, or sectors that you tell the game about ahead of time can now be preloaded. And what happens is the preloading process goes into the sector, generates absolutely everything, and then looks for important landmarks, like a station that might buy or sell certain goods. After it finds that landmark in the sector, it sort of creates a icon for it, or think of it as a node, just a little, it makes a note to itself in memory that says, hey, there's a station here that does this thing. And then it takes all of the stuff that it generated for that sector, puts it on the hard disk, and forgets about it, so that it has space in memory to generate the next sector. But the little notes that it takes, they stay in memory. And the reason they stay in memory is because that way the AI can use those notes to plot courses and do missions, things like it can trade from one station to another station, all in a simulation, all when you aren't looking at it. So pretty much the whole goal of this update was A, make the map screen look better, but B, to get the AI doing dynamic stuff. I talked, God, it's been like an hour of ranting at this point. I talked before about how an individual sector was generated when I was looking at the map. How it was the CPU in a different thread generated noise, calculated based on the noise what should be in that sector, created the icon, so on and so forth. Well, this new system is even more complicated. Essentially, what I'm looking at right now in this map is done like this. As I move the camera around, these grids are queued up to be loaded. Loading a grid now doesn't just depend on the one grid location for noise sampling, because a grid is actually a member of a region, and the region is generated on the video card. So if I go over far enough, I'll eventually get to a grid that's in a new region. And when I do, that grid will trigger sort of the generation of the next region. Now you're not seeing it happen slowly here. I guess we're probably not going to see it because I've done a pretty good job of making it seamless. But the region is sent out to the video card, drawn like a texture, brought back, blown up. The one grid chunk is extracted from it. We do a ton of math to decide what it should be, whether it should be asteroids, how dense it should be, what type of asteroids it should be, so on and so forth. And yet, it is still mapped, well, and then I guess I should say, it is still ultimately mapped to a color, and before it is mapped to a color, it still allows going out to the data and overwriting what is in this with whatever is in the data. So this is an infinite procedurally generated universe that allows a mod maker to overwrite part of the universe with their own map data, and it allows the mod maker to create their own sector types. So you could create an entirely new nebula type and then go into the game universe and draw, like in a paint application, just draw pixel by pixel the sectors that you want in this infinite universe to use your new nebula type, and it would just show up. In fact, that's what we have done for the home sector here. The reason you see this sector in the layout that you see it in is because we created these sector types and then we just drew them in this shape, and whether we even keep this sector layout is up for debate. This is the old sector layout and we haven't gotten to touching that part of the data yet. So infinite procedural universe where the contents of the universe can be designed by external mod data, and the layout of the universe can be designed by external mod data, and the look of both the map and of the universe can be decided by external mod data. So these are icons, I talked about that, loaded from outside the game. And also, at the same time, if you add a sector generation technique that places sort of stations and stuff inside these sectors, they will be preloaded, and the AI will be aware of the contents of places in the game world that you've never been to before. And so this is a dynamic infinite procedural universe that can be manually mapped, in that we're planning to have a fully dynamic economy. These ships are going to move from sector to sector, doing trade missions between actual stations that have actual resource management. In fact, my hope is that they will have to keep track of things like how many crew they have and how much food they have to feed that crew, and if they run out of food, that crew will start dying off or resorting to cannibalism, such that you'll be able to manipulate the economy of the entire galaxy by blowing up trade convoys or buying low and selling high, or whatever you want. You can barricade a system or blockade a system such that they can't receive food, and eventually the stations in that system will, their crew will all starve to death. But when you leave the system alone again, they'll bring in troop transports to refill those stations with new crew members, and so on and so forth. Anyhow, that's the plan for world changes in the next update. So, thanks for watching, and if you don't mind, I've got some really horrible, awesome, fun math to do. Later.